The next morning, the world turned upside down. The first thing I knew of it was seeing Sousa and Ash cursing each other publicly on Facebook. A group had gotten together calling themselves the Blame Culture and decided to name and shame the people they thought had contributed most to the end of the world by throwing wilting roses at their front doors and offices, which seemed like a bit of a waste of time to me. Of course, Sousa's dad didn't stand a chance, because when he wasn't working on a machine to demolish nature and save humanity, he created stuff like chairs and tables that loads of people could buy for not very much, and often didn't really need, which had gone from being the coolest job to the most shameful overnight. And I mean, worse than being a banker. It's funny, I sometimes felt a bit jealous of Sousa, always going to parties and having loads of money and everybody knowing who her dad was. But I didn't envy her in the slightest at that moment, especially when I saw the lines of awful posts people had put on her wall. I asked if she was okay on chat. As usual, she was cool and said they were fine, but the police had advised them not to leave the house. Nobody could prove who was at the head of Blame Culture, but it was pretty obvious it was Ash's dad. She didn't pull any punches when it came to him. I made sympathetic noises, but didn't want to say anything bad about Ash. She said that everybody was assuming she would vote for the machine if she could, but that wasn't necessarily right. She said it didn't seem fair, making nature take the hit for the mess we've made, and then making more of it. That, of course, she wanted to live, but that she didn't like to think of no trees and animals, and she said, "I don't know if I'd be very happy in that kind of world, especially knowing we were the reason everything else is gone." I asked if she could ask her dad if there was another way, but she said, "I've tried everything, believe me. He doesn't tell me anything." Oh well, it's not the end of the world or anything. "Oh, damn," I wrote, followed by a smiley. "Smiley? You're twisted," she said. "You know it," I replied. Downstairs, Mom and Dad were glued to the news, which was the only thing on. I nodded my head and said, "All right." We watched reports and shared disbelieving expressions to see the havoc. Riots, marches, murders, arguments. There were nice things too, and stories of random kindness that made me sad. We laughed, as quite a few people seemed to have jumped on the "if the world was about to end" wagon, and were doing things they'd always wanted to, like jumping out of planes and splashing out on end-of-the-world parties. The reporter talked of a huge shakeup of families. Parted couples got back together and husbands or wives left home for affairs. Or, as one woman put it, "Because I realized I didn't want to look at his miserable face for the rest of my life if there wasn't going to be much of it left." Mom pointed her finger at Dad and said, "Don't you even think about it." He pulled her onto his knee and tickled her until she screamed. We decided to go for a picnic and discuss our votes. As we entered the woodland, it was as if the forest had put on a show to remind us what it was. The sun shone beams that made patterns of lace on the floor, and the bushes revealed tiny white star-like flowers I had forgotten they could have. There didn't appear to be any other people around, and it was as if we were the last family on Earth. A gust of wind touched my face like a welcome, and as I looked around, I felt such a wave of wonder for the majesty of the gentle-barked beasts surrounding us. It was like seeing them for the first time. I smiled to see the chestnut leaves beginning to unfurl like bashful little hands not quite ready to stretch themselves out yet. We settled on our picnic bench, and by some kind of unspoken pact, pretended everything was normal. Not normal as in Dad having no job and us having no money, and the world ending around us, but normal like before, when we were happy. Mom opened the Prosecco with a smile and flourish, and Dad threw a can of beer to me, which I caught in midair. We laid out a picnic, laughing about times we'd had there before. Christmas, when we'd come in the morning to drink Buck's Fizz, and it had started to snow, and when I'd broken my tooth on one of Auntie Izzy's rock cakes that we thought must have actually been made of rock. Even Teddy seemed to be in on the game as he fertled around, snorting and snuffling at the grasses, wagging his tail lazily and half-heartedly chasing a squirrel. But as the last sandwich was eaten and the last sip of beer had gone, The sun disappeared behind a cloud, making the light flat, and I shivered. I can't do it, you know. Can't vote to get rid of all this. Now hang on a second, Hen, Dad replied. It is understandable that you think that, but you are only 13 and you are young and naive. We have to think sensibly. I couldn't believe it. You are not telling me you're going to vote for all of this to end? I said. After all your speeches about doing the right thing, and values maketh the man, and all the other annoying sayings we've put up with forever, you can't be serious? Dad took a breath, as if collecting himself, but he was giving me a warning look. He said, I know you're trying to do the right thing, but this is different. Different? I replied. Because the price is more than you want to pay? Because it doesn't suit you? When was anything sensible worthwhile anyway? Dad started to bash out a self-righteous defense until Mom put her hand on his arm and said, Listen, Harold, Henry has a vote. It is important he is comfortable with his decision. I just couldn't believe Dad was sitting there under the trees, laughing at the birds, planning to press the big red button to kill them all. What has that tree done to you? I asked. Has it swallowed gases that are poisonous to us, to let us live and breathe in the world? And that bird, did it come and peck your eyes out? Or did we endanger its habitat? Dad was shaking his head and huffing and puffing as if I was saying something childish, which made me mad. I said, Vote to kill the trees and everything else if you have to, but don't pretend to be doing the right thing. Don't pretend to be sensible. And then, you know that moment where you're going to say something really bad? That will be the worst, most hurtful thing you can say, and you say it. Because at that point, it's not even about the argument anymore. It's about how fired up you are, how fast and hot the blood is running around your system, and how deep you suddenly need to cut. Well, I did it. I said it. Weak, sad, loser. And then I glared at him, daring him to hit me, ready for it. He didn't, though. He just looked stunned and turned and walked towards home, leaving Mom and me to clear up the remnants of the picnic. On the way home, Mom told me she was proud of me for fighting for what I believed in, but I didn't feel like anything good, for having taken a cheap shot at Dad. For the first time, I started thinking about what the outcome of my vote would mean, because really before, it had just seemed like a story. Suddenly, knowing what was the right thing to do and actually doing it were two very different things. Isn't it confusing, stranger, to realize you don't know what you're talking about?